The sound of the doorbell startled me, sharp and unexpected in the stillness of the evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not with Steve out, probably halfway through a bourbon and a bad golf joke with his buddies. For a moment, I froze, fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket draped across my lap. It was a little past 7, and the neighborhood had settled into its usual quiet lull. Who could it be? Sliding off the couch, I glanced at my reflection in the hall mirror, messy silver curls and tired eyes staring back at me. Not exactly presentable, but at 62, I wasn't too worried about making impressions. My bare feet made soft pats against the hardwood as I approached the door. When I opened it, I wasn't sure what I expected, certainly not him. "Hey Linda, right?" His voice was deep, rough around the edges like sandpaper, but not unkind. A young man stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt, unbuttoned just enough to reveal a glimpse of a white undershirt. There was a tool belt slung low on his hips, and his coppery hair looked like he'd just stepped out of a windstorm. Hazel eyes studied me with an intensity that made me tug the blanket tighter around myself. "Yes, and you must be." "Tyler," I said, the words coming out a little more hesitant than I intended. "Yeah, Grandpa's grandson." He offered a crooked grin, leaning slightly on the doorframe. "Surprise, I guess." Surprise didn't even begin to cover it. Steve had mentioned his grandson in passing. Something about him working long hours in construction, moving between sites. I hadn't given it much thought at the time, but now, seeing him standing here, larger than life, I felt an odd mix of curiosity and relief. Relief, because frankly, the silence in this house had been suffocating lately. And curiosity, because, well, Tyler was nothing like what I imagined. Come in," I said quickly, stepping aside. "It's so nice to finally meet you." He carried an air of casual confidence as he entered, but there was a boyishness to him too. He dropped his bag near the door, shaking the cold off his boots. "It's good Grandpa's got you now," he said as he looked around the living room, nodding approvingly. "After Grandma passed, it's been a long time." The mention of Steve's late wife was delicate, almost reverent, and I nodded, unsure how to respond. Tyler's eyes lingered on the mantel, where a photo of Steve and me sat beside one of him and his late wife. His jaw tensed briefly, but he masked it with a quick smile. "I didn't mean to just show up like this," he added, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was working nearby, and Grandpa's always saying how I should drop by sometime." "I'm so glad you did," I said, maybe a little too eagerly. "It gets quiet around here." "Quiet, huh?" He smirked, that hazel gaze locking on me again. "Not a bad thing, though. Beats the noise of a construction site." I laughed lightly, though his words carried a weight I couldn't quite place. Was he just making small talk, or was there something else on his mind? As he settled into the armchair by the fireplace, the room suddenly felt smaller. His presence was magnetic, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't name, something that made my pulse quicken. "So," I began, sitting across from him, "what's the occasion for the visit, or do I have to bribe you with dinner to hear the full story?" Tyler's grin widened, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dinner sounds great, actually, but the story." He trailed off, glancing toward the window. "Let's just say I've been needing a break, and I figured family's the best place to start." So, I looked at him and asked, "What do you like to eat, Tyler?" Trying to figure out how to make a good impression. He leaned back in the armchair, smirked a little, and said, "Surprise me." Oh, he had no idea who he was dealing with. I gave him a little nod like, challenge accepted, and walked into the kitchen. But instead of diving into a recipe or rummaging through the pantry, I pulled out my phone and ordered pizza. Quick, easy, and totally on brand for me. I wasn't about to spend hours slaving over a hot stove. Let's be real. A good pizza beats a half-burnt casserole any day. When the doorbell rang, I practically skipped to the door. "Surprise," I said, holding up the pizza boxes like I just won the lottery. Tyler tilted his head, his hazel eyes narrowing in playful disbelief. "Really? I thought you were whipping up some secret family recipe back there." "Sweetheart, this is the family recipe," I quipped, setting the boxes down on the coffee table. "It's called Linda Doesn't Cook on Weeknights." He burst out laughing, this deep, hearty sound that filled the room. And just like that, the tension I'd been feeling melted away. We dove into the pizza like two people who hadn't eaten all day. Between bites, the conversation flowed so easily it surprised me. Tyler had this sarcastic streak, and I couldn't help but match it with my own. "So," he said, leaning back and wiping his hands on a napkin. "Grandpa really lucked out, huh? Marrying someone who keeps pizza night in the rotation." "Oh, please," I shot back, rolling my eyes. "Your grandpa lives on chicken Caesar salads and bad coffee. This is probably the healthiest meal he's had all week." Tyler laughed again, shaking his head. "I can see why he likes you. It felt good, you know, having someone around who didn't just nod along but actually talk to me. Steve's great and all, but most days he's either at the golf course or deep into his TV shows. I'm just here, alone." But sitting across from Tyler, bantering and joking, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in a while. For a second, I forgot I was a 62-year-old woman with a grumpy retired husband. I felt young. Maybe it was the way Tyler threw his head back when he laughed, or how his eyes lit up when he talked about his work. Or maybe it was just nice to have someone look at me like I was interesting, like I mattered. And then, right as Tyler was about to launch into some story about a mishap at a construction site, the front door clicked open. My heart jumped, like a kid caught sneaking candy. Steve walked in, and for a moment I thought he was going to scold me for not cooking. But then his face lit up when he saw Tyler. "Well, I'll be damned," Steve said, grinning ear to ear. "Grandpa." Tyler shot up from the couch so fast, I thought he might knock over the coffee table. He crossed the room in 3 big strides and practically tackled Steve in a hug. I just sat there, watching the two of them, smiling like an idiot. Tyler was so excited, like a little kid seeing his favorite toy again. And Steve? I hadn't seen him look that happy in weeks. Steve grabbed a slice of pizza, scarfed it down like he was in some kind of eating competition, and then, just as quickly, announced he was heading back out. "Just needed to grab a few things," he said, patting Tyler on the shoulder. "You stay here tomorrow too, all right? Don't run off." Tyler nodded, grinning. "You got it, Grandpa." And just like that, the door closed behind him, leaving us in the warm glow of the living room. I let out a sigh, a mix of relief and irritation. Steve didn't even sit down to talk with Tyler, his own grandson who had taken the time to visit. It stung, honestly. If he didn't have time for me, fine, I was used to that. But Tyler? I thought he'd at least make an effort. Tyler, though, shrugged it off. "Grandpa's still like this, huh? Always on the go, like he's riding some flying unicorn or something." That line caught me off guard, and I laughed so hard I had to clutch my side. "Flying unicorn?" I managed between giggles. "That's a new one." "Am I wrong, though?" he teased, leaning back in the chair with a grin. "No," I admitted, wiping at the corners of my eyes. But beneath the laughter, I felt disappointed. If Steve couldn't be bothered to stay, it was his loss. Tyler deserved better. Tyler didn't seem fazed, though. He had this easygoing way about him, like nothing could bother him for long. It made the night feel lighter somehow, even after Steve's abrupt exit. After we finished off the pizza, I grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen, and we made our way to the patio. The night air was crisp, and the sky was a blanket of stars, each one brighter than the last. We sat side by side, sipping wine and pointing out constellations, or at least trying to. "Is that the Big Dipper?" I asked, squinting at the sky. "Pretty sure that's a plane, Grandma Linda," Tyler teased, his voice full of mock seriousness. I playfully swatted his arm, and we both laughed. It felt good to laugh like that, to let go of everything and just enjoy the moment. At some point, probably fueled by the wine and the stars, I turned to him and asked, "So, Tyler, do you have a girlfriend?" He hesitated, swirling his wine glass. "Not right now," he said, his voice softer. "I'm done with the whole casual thing. Hookups, meaningless flings. It's not for me anymore. I want something real. Someone who gets me, a soulmate." The way he said it, his hazel eyes locking with mine, sent a shiver through me. Maybe it was the wine, or the way the starlight danced in his gaze, but for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A spark. I must have blushed like a teenager because Tyler smirked. "Why? Got someone in mind for me?" "Oh, please," I said, trying to laugh it off. "If I did, you'd be the first to know." We fell into a playful back and forth, the conversation full of teasing and just the faintest hints of flirtation. It felt so natural, so alive. By the time the bottle was empty, I realized how late it had gotten. I let him back inside and set up the guest bed for him, fluffing the pillows and laying out fresh sheets. "All right, Mr. Soulmate Seeker," I said, hands on my hips. "This bed is all yours. Sleep tight." He smiled at me, that crooked grin that made my stomach flip. "Good night, Linda. Thanks for everything tonight." "Good night, Tyler," I said, lingering for a second too long before turning away. As I climbed into my own bed, the house felt different, warmer somehow. And as I stared up at the ceiling, my mind kept drifting back to the patio, the stars, the wine, and the way Tyler's eyes had held mine just a little longer than necessary. That night, I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of the front door to creak open. When Steve finally came home, it was well past a.m. The door clicked softly, followed by the muffled shuffle of his shoes as he kicked them off by the entrance. I heard the water start in the bathroom a minute later, and I knew he was taking one of his quick, no-nonsense showers, the kind he always took after a long day out. When he finally slid into bed beside me, the mattress dipped under his weight. He mumbled something about how the golf game had run late, how the guys had insisted on another round of drinks at the clubhouse. It wasn't a real conversation, just a collection of words, tossed my way out of obligation. I hummed in response, not because I cared about what he was saying, but because it felt easier than staying silent. Before I knew it, he was snoring. I turned onto my side, watching the faint rise and fall of his chest in the dark. 5 years of marriage, and here we were, two people sharing a bed, a house, and a life, but feeling like strangers. The warmth that used to be between us, if it had ever truly been there, had long since faded. Now it felt like we were just roommates. I sighed softly, my breath catching in the stillness. Steve wasn't a bad man. He was kind in his own quiet way, but he didn't see me. Not really. As I lay there, I thought about earlier that evening. The laughter, the playful banter, the easy way Tyler had filled the room with his presence. My hand slipped involuntarily. I thought of Tyler's strong arms, his rough hands, and that smirk that made me feel seen. And with a deep, shaky breath, I began. It was something I'd grown accustomed to, a solitary dance that I knew by heart. But tonight, I couldn't help but think of him, of the zest in his voice when he talked about soulmates. And just as I was catching my breath, I heard the rustle of bedsheets and felt a weight shift beside me. Panic shot through me as I realized Steve had woken up. "Linda?" His voice was groggy with sleep. "What are you doing?" My heart skipped a beat. I had to think fast. "Oh, Steve, you startled me," I gasped, pulling my hand as if it had been stung. "It's just... there's a mosquito. Been bothering me all night." I hoped my voice didn't give me away. He studied me for a moment, then lay back down with a sigh. I knew he hadn't bought it. But what could I say? The next morning, I woke up to the soft light streaming through the blinds, feeling groggy from a night of restless thoughts. I dragged myself to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and made breakfast. Eggs, toast, bacon, the usual. Steve, true to form, grabbed a plate, muttered something vague about errands or golf or God knows what, and was out the door before I could even ask where he was going. Typical. I shook my head and turned my attention to Tyler, who was still asleep in the guest room. I knocked lightly on the door. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead, breakfast's ready." He emerged a few minutes later, his coppery hair an endearing mess, rubbing his eyes like a kid who'd overslept for school. "Morning, Grandma Linda," he said with a crooked grin, settling at the table. After he'd polished off his plate, he leaned back in his chair, stretching. "So," he said, his hazel eyes sparkling with a mix of mischief and excitement, "I'm feeling adventurous today. What do you say we get out of here? I want to take you to this spot I used to go to all the time. You'll love it." "Adventurous, huh?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "All right, I'm in, but you better not be taking me to some dive bar." He laughed, shaking his head. "Trust me, Grandma Linda, you're going to be surprised." Before I knew it, we were in his truck, winding our way out of the city. The tall buildings of Nashville gave way to rolling hills, then to thick woods. Tyler had the windows rolled down, country music spilling out into the crisp morning air. We finally arrived at a small, nondescript clearing where Tyler parked the truck. I glanced around, wondering what we were doing here, but before I could ask, he hopped out and gestured for me to follow. "Just wait," he said, grabbing a small duffel from the back. We walked down a narrow trail to a dock where an old rowboat was tied up. "You're kidding," I said, laughing as he started untying it. "Nope," he said, his grin widening. "Hop in." It was a short ride across the water, the boat rocking gently with each pull of the oars. The air was so still. The only sounds were the soft splash of the water and the occasional chirp of a bird. When we finally reached the other side, I was stunned. Bear Island, it felt like. Another world. The thick trees formed a canopy overhead, dappling the ground with sunlight. The air smelled earthy, clean. It was a stark contrast to the noise and busyness of Nashville. "You like it?" Tyler asked, pulling the boat onto the shore. "I love it," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "This is incredible." He flashed a proud smile and got to work gathering wood for a fire. Within minutes, he had it crackling. "I used to come here all the time," he said, pulling a couple of beers and sandwiches out of the duffel, whenever I needed to get away. The sun had reached its zenith, casting a golden glow across the island. The silence was broken only by the occasional bird call and the crackle of the fire. Tyler had shed his flannel shirt, his muscular arms flexing as he poked at the fire, his t-shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. I couldn't help but feel a little warmth spread through me as I watched him. He leaned back, his gaze drifting to my chest. I was wearing a spaghetti strap top. The cool air was doing some magic, and it was like I was playing my cards right. "You're something else, you know that?" I felt a thrill at his words, a tingling in my belly. And before I knew what I was saying, I whispered, "Why don't we make some memories right here? We're all alone. No one will ever know." For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes wide. And then, without a word, he was on his feet, reaching out a hand to help me up. I took it, letting him pull me to my feet. We stumbled away from the fire, into the trees. Tyler's hands were rough and sure. We laid down on the soft pine needle-covered earth. The scent of him was intoxicating, like pure masculine power. "You're so beautiful, Linda." "Grandpa's a lucky man," he murmured. Instead of feeling shy, I felt powerful, desired. He took that out. It had been so long since I'd seen one up close. "Let's make some memories, baby," I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't need any more encouragement. The sensation was overwhelming. As we moved together, I couldn't help but think what would happen if Steve found out. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed it away. For now, all I could do was hold on to Tyler, basking in the warmth of our stolen moment. Because sometimes, in the quiet stillness of a life unlived, you have to steal a little bit of wildness to feel truly alive.